Boatworks today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexial Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much.
So welcome back to the shop, everybody. I hope you're all having a fantastic weekend. Now, I decided I was going to spare you guys a bunch of sanding. I'm sure I'll probably pop in some little snippets here and there, right in the very beginning. But for the most part, I saved you probably, I think this ended up taking about 3 hours, 3-ish hours of sanding. And, well, boring as hell, so that's why you're only getting little snippets of it. Now, when this is all said and done, this panel is now prepped and ready for the next steps. Now, I'm pretty sure, as you just saw, this panel as it stands right now, there's only 3 layers of 1708 on pretty much over every surface. So the bottom, the sides, everything else, which isn't, it's less than half than what I'm anticipating, having on here when everything is said and done. But as you can see, even with just those 3 layers, this panel is still very, very floppy, very flexible, way more movement than what I'm looking for. Now, I need to kind of reverse engineer kind of the way that I want to approach this. I'm going to start with what my goal is. My goal on this is to have it as light and as stiff as possible within reason, right? I mean, it's one of those situations where the juice has got to be worth the squeeze. So the effort and the materials that I put into this needs to be within reason, reasonably justified for the end result. At the end of the day, this panel is going to be spanning roughly a 3 by 5 foot hole, or storage compartment, on the aft deck of the Bertram. And even though I'm trying to keep this, as an unsupported lid across that entire almost 5 feet, in the back of my mind, I know that's probably not going to be realistic, but I can still try and shoot towards that. At the end, if I need to, I can always have a support that comes up along that center stringer, kind of down in this compartment that this is going to be covering. I could have that center stringer extend up and support this panel from the underside. It would split that large compartment into 2 sections, which wouldn't be the end of the world, but I'm going to try to avoid that. But at the end of the day, I already know that that's probably going to be the default course that I'm going to have to take. So now what I'm planning to do next is I'm going to be installing some type of a coring material over the majority of this panel. Whatever material I end up going with, I am going to keep it roughly about 4 inches from the perimeter in all the way around here. And that just so that's going to give me some room for when I'm glassing all this in, I can have the glass come down over the coring material, have a little bit of room here for the glass to kind of sit and kind of grab onto something before it's got to make a relatively sharp radius coming up here with only roughly about 1 inch of height. So it's going to be a little bit, these inside corners are going to be a little bit potentially troublesome. Not a major pain in the butt, but they are going to be something that I'm going to have to kind of keep an eye on and babysit throughout the whole time I'm doing this. Now, keeping that in mind, I've got, at least what I have in the shop here, I have 3 options as far as what coring material I want to go with. Option number 1 is going to be, I have some 3/4 inch thick balsa. Now, I haven't used any type of a wood product on anything else, anywhere else on this Bertram project. It's all been Cusa. Now, the reason that I'm kind of offering the balsa in here as an option is because of the thickness. Now, the balsa that I have is 3/4 inch thick, which is ideally what I would like to be able to have for the coring on this panel. I think that kind of finds that nice balance between thickness, to where it's going to provide, plenty of stiffness, but it's not going to be just overly thick when this is all said and done. I don't know why I've got an issue with that, but I don't want this panel to be, 1.5 inches thick. So anyways, so 3/4 inch thickness is ideal in my opinion, but it's balsa. So while it is an option, it's not really one that I'm giving a lot of serious thought to, but it's still, technically an option. The other 2 options that I have are going to be using Cusa. Now, there's going to be a bit of a compromise. I do have Cusa in 1/2 inch as well as 1 inch. Unfortunately, I don't have that 3/4, which is why, again, like I mentioned, I'm keeping the balsa in here as a potential contender just because of that thickness. Now, the Cusa that I have on board in the 1/2 inch, it's already being kind of jigsaw puzzled. So it's been cut up and used for different things throughout the project up to this point. So the end result is the size panel that I can, or coring material panel that I could cut out in 1/2 inch is going to be smaller than what I would ideally like to have. Rather than being in roughly, say, 4 inches all the way around, it's going to be closer to 6, maybe even a little bit more along the top and the bottom. Again, compromise, not ideal, but it is definitely an option. Now, the other Cusa option that I have that I've mentioned is I have material in 1 inch thickness. I have full sheets in 1 inch thickness. I could have this entire panel 1 inch thick Cusa, but I think that's just obscene. I think that's just way overkill. I think it's going to look odd having that thick of coring material hanging down the bottom. It's going to stick up higher or lower, I guess, when this is all turned around. But as it sits right now, if I put a 1 inch coring material on here and then glass it, it's going to stick up proud compared to the perimeter all around here. Maybe that's what's hanging me up. I don't like the way that that's going to look. All right, let's see what we've got to work with here. I can either look at taking this as like a rectangle like this, or I could look at it as taking a rectangle like this. So I guess whichever one is bigger is what's going to win. So if I look at taking this section here, the max height I can get is going to be 31 inches by 48. Yep, so 31 by 48, which gives it'll give me about 6 inches shy, along these two ends here. But I think that's okay. Whereas if I look to take it this way, I'm at 28.5, but I'm at 49 versus 48. So for the sake of minimizing waste, I think I'm gonna take and make my cut right down here, and then use basically this entire bottom third, give or take, use that as the coring on here. And it's still, like I said, roughly 31. Yeah, roughly 31. So after a little bit of jockeying around here, I've got the Cusa centered in here, at least as good as I can. The way that it's looking, I've got 4 inches in here, another 4 inches right through here. So it's centered fore and aft, and then along the sides. Not quite as good, but still pretty decent. 5.5 and 5, well actually 5 5/8. So it was 5 5/8 on both sides, roughly 4 inches fore and aft. Now for bonding this down, I am going to be using epoxy, but this time around I'm going to be using the 5-to-1 epoxy. And again, this all comes as a kit and pretty simple. It comes with its own pumps. The only thing you got to make sure of is that the pump kit that you're using also says 5-to-1. Otherwise, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Now, the reason I'm using the 5-to-1 versus their 2-to-1 is because the 5-to-1 has, when it cures, it's a stiffer material. And when I'm looking to, try and add as much stiffness as I can to this panel, I'm gonna try and bank my chances as best I can. I mean, at the end of the day, do I really think it's gonna make a night and day difference? I don't know, probably not, just because I'm using a single layer. Now, if I were doing multiple layers of glass with 5-to-1, a given thickness, say a 1/4 inch thickness of solid 1708, one was wet out with 5-to-1, the other was wet out with 2-to-1, would there be a difference there? Probably. Pretty good chance that that would actually be the case. Okay, now as far as some questions, I've had some folks ask me, am I able to apply, say, like 2-to-1 epoxy over top of 5-to-1 and vice versa? So applying the 5-to-1 over top of the 2-to-1. And the answer on that is, as long as one of the surfaces has cured, even just as short as overnight, then the answer is yes. So when I made this panel, I used 2-to-1 for this, but I'm going to be using 5-to-1 on that. And this panel has, obviously it's been cured, it's been sanded and cleaned, so there should be zero issues whatsoever. Now with both pumps primed, now it's just going to be a matter of doing pump for pump. So even though this is a 5-to-1, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do 5 pumps and then 1 pump. That's the reason the pumps themselves are metered. So it's just going to be 1 pump and 1 pump, and that'll give you your 5-to-1. Or if you're using the 2-to-1 epoxy, you'll use the appropriate pumps. And again, 1 and 1 will give you the correct ratio. I did 20 pumps of the resin, and for anyone that's really curious, 20 pumps is going to equate to roughly 12 ounces or 350 milliliters. So I did 20 of this. I suppose I can get rid of this for now. So now it's 20 of the resin, so I'm going to do 20 of the hardener. Now this is a lot thinner, so it's going to go really quick. 1, 2, 3. Get rid of that. All right, so now I've got a fair amount of volume in here, so I need to move kind of quick. So I'm going to give this an initial stir or mixing. Then I'm going to start incorporating in the silica or the Cabasil. And let's see, some other questions that I've had asked. Okay, well, working with Cusa specifically, do I need to glass the Cusa before we start, either bonding it or glassing over top of it? And again, on that one, when I talked with the folks at Cusa, they had said that they've got builders that are doing it both ways. So some builders will actually take a panel of Cusa, they'll glass it, say like we're talking about a transom. They'll glass the faces first before they actually go ahead and bond it in place against the outer skin of the transom. And they have other builders, they say that they don't do anything. They just bond it, the bare Cusa, in place and then glass over top of it. And as far as any kind of a difference, they said that Cusa said that they have not noticed any bit of a difference one way or the other. So in my opinion, if you've got extra material that you need to burn up and some time on your hands to kill, if you want to glass the face of the Cusa before you start actually installing it, by all means go for it. But from what I've been told by Cusa is that it makes zero difference one way or the other. With the Cusa panels, when you first get them, do you need to sand them to kind of open up the surface before you start glassing over top of them or spreading epoxy or anything like that? And again, there the answer is no, because as part of the manufacturing process, when they're making the Cusa panels, their last step, maybe it's the second to last step, but one of the last steps that they do is they run their panels through a big 5x10 or 4x8 foot sanding drum, and that's how they bring it down to a consistent uniform thickness. and in smoothness. So when you get your panels brand new, they look the way that they do because they've already been sanded. So you do not need to do any additional sanding on that unless, you know, like what I was doing here where I needed to round over an edge. If you need to do some shaping, that's a little bit different. But as far as sanding for adhesion, no, absolutely not. That's about the viscosity. I would typically go maybe a little bit thicker, but I'm starting to feel some heat building up. So, bring you in for a little look-see. I want to have some weight down on the Cusa here, but I don't want to have a ton because I don't want to squeeze the epoxy out. And that's exactly what can happen if you add too much weight. So ideally, you want to have, when this is all said and done, you want to have a nice thin layer of epoxy in between your panels. Like if you're bonding like your Cusa down to a panel, you want to maintain a nice thin layer of epoxy in between those two surfaces. Whereas if you put a death grip on here and you squeeze the crap out of it, you're going to push all that epoxy out and you're going to end up having a dry bond. So that is not what you want. If you're able to see, there is some squeeze out here, but for the most part, it's just a nice thin little beading of squeeze out, which is exactly what I'm hoping for. Because when you get a little bit of squeeze out, that means you had enough resin. If you don't get any squeeze out, well, then you didn't have quite enough. And if you get like a ton of squeeze out, well, you're wasting material. Because I'm gonna come around the perimeter of this. Any excess that's squeezed out, I'm gonna go ahead and clean that up now so that tomorrow it's just gonna be a real quick hand sanding to kind of scuff it, and that everything should be ready for start laying out some fiberglass. Well, good morning, and it is time to start cutting some glass. So the plan coming into this for today is I'm going to get two layers of 1708 on the bottom side of this. Now, the way I'm going to be laying this glass, it's going to be in sections or in pieces to an extent. Working by myself, I want to keep things as manageable as I can. So trying to keep the pieces smaller rather than just one large piece with all of the different contours and everything that's going on here. It's just gonna make my life a lot easier. So thinking about this last night, kind of what I think the plan is going to be is I'm gonna cut some 1708 to be the size of this Cusa plus 2 inches all the way around. So the glass is going to come on here. It's gonna extend down roughly to about right here, all the way around. Again, like I said, roughly 2 inches onto the panel all the way around. I am not going to be running this glass all the way up to these edges and up here, because then rather than the panel itself, these edges here resting on the deck, the panel is going to be resting on the top side of those molded ridges, right along where this yellow tape is, and I don't want that. Well, it appears I'm going to have a little bit of a change in plans for the tail end of this week. I got some fiberglass in, and I'm already back out. I've got just enough to do this first layer, but not the second. So I'm gonna get done what I can. So right now I'm gonna be mixing up a small batch of some thickened epoxy. Here I am gonna be using the 2-to-1 epoxy again, mainly because I know that you can do 2-to-1 over top of 5-to-1 and vice versa when one of the materials is cured. I'm not so confident that you can do that while both of the materials are still wet. So I am going to be using the 2-to-1 to wet out the glass, and that's strictly because of the viscosity differences between the 2-to-1 and the 5-to-1. 2-to-1 being a little bit thinner viscosity. So I am going to be using the 2-to-1 for wetting out the glass. So I'm also going to be using that for creating my fillets all around the Cusa here. Other than a bunch of grunts and moaning, but... Ooh, you put on some weight. Well, it fits. So that's one good thing. Now, for the real test. I weigh 170, 170-ish, 170, 175. Oh! Oh! I don't think there's even any flex. Hold on a second. All right, I'm gonna have to look at this in the camera or like when I'm editing this to see if there's any flex, but oh, yes! Dude, this is frickin' sweet. Oh, hell yes. I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna complain. But this thing, as it weighs right now, I wouldn't be surprised if this thing scaled in probably around 70, 80 pounds, 70 pounds probably, which is a bit heavier than what I was hoping for. But now seeing how this, I don't think there's any flex in this, which means I probably could have scaled back how beefy I built this thing, and it still probably would have been just fine. But dude, I am not gonna argue with the results, dude. This is awesome. Just for posterity, I think that's a word. I still gotta build up that far edge over there. That cross brace pocket thing has not been glassed in yet, but I've got good contact all the way around. Beautiful. And I still have a nice pocket in the back for the water to come, flow off into this channel, then drain off either to the port or to the starboard side and out this tiny ass little sad excuse for a weep hole or a scupper. But I didn't do it. And I don't know what folks are doing, if anything, to try and make those a little bit bigger, but that's not a problem for tonight. Tonight's problem, done. So that right there is what I am going to call a major win, and I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna cut this week off on a positive note. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found this helpful, and if you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button, and seriously, hit that notification bell. YouTube, I'm still on YouTube's crap list because of the time I had to take off last year from surgeries. So you hit that notification bell, I gotta get my views back up. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave those down below. I will do my best to follow up with you. And as always, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And I'll see you next week. I still can't believe this worked.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.